And inshallah, I will stop here the main presentation and open up for questions. Barakallahu li wa lakum wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
MashaAllah, that's very kind of you, Sheikh Dr. Shu'aib. What great you have delivered to us. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala bless you always. And now, if you attendants have additional questions, you can deliver it directly, and you can type your name first, and then we will unmute your account here, and then you can ask us your question. Okay, sisters and brothers, please want to ask questions to the Sheikh. Okay. Mr. Sani, do you want to ask directly to the Sheikh? Or maybe other attendants?
Assalamualaikum.
Okay, welcome, sir.
Sheikh Suhaib, Jazakallah khairan for speaking today. I don't know whether you're still...
This is my friend from
Yes, Sheikh. Yeah, Sheikh. I met you several times. I still remember vividly yourself, but you have many Jamaah, so I don't think you remember me. Oh, mashallah. Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. It's a very pleasure. I do still want to ask you my previous question, Sheikh.
Sure. Go ahead.
The recommendation, Sheikh, about the English translation of the Quran, or if you feel there is no best English translation, maybe one have pro and cons and another excel in different aspect, but like in this different aspect, you can explain that for us as well, Sheikh. And especially for the Learn Quran Tafsir, Sheikh, we display just one translation in the English. What do you recommend to display in the Learn Quran Tafsir? Jazakallah khairan, Shaykh Suhaib. Very nice to meet you again.
Oh, Yakum, thank you so much for your question. Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, so people need to know what are some of the good translations to use. I mean, so yeah, the ones I showed you, I'm comfortable that you would read them. Pretty much any translation, I think, will do, you know. But okay, so yeah, when I've mentioned Professor Abdul Halim's translation, it has very positive features that I mentioned to you about being very readable in English and fluent in English. So if I just, you know, if I don't have lots of information about what an individual needs, for the most part, I would just mention this translation by Professor Abdul Halim. It's not because of a conviction about it being the best. It's just because I know that it is very good and it's widely available, and and he's my professor, and you know, out of respect and the rest of it. There are other translations that have other types of features that are a bit different. So, for example, if you're looking for a translation by which you want to actually learn about Arabic words and Arabic structures. So the first way that I started to learn Arabic was by reading the translation of the Quran. And it so happened that was the translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. It's not specially suited to the purpose, it's the translation that I had. And I still love it to this day, because it's one that, you know, I made a connection to the Quran through it. So what could be useful in that is a translation which is much more kind of direct or literal, or at least, and what I mean here is if it follows the word order reasonably closely. So a good example of that is Sahih International Translation. Again, not to say best, really in any meaningful way. It's not about being best, but in this particular aspect, if I was looking for that, and sometimes I was. So, for example, I've produced some Quran videos, and I wanted subtitles to the Quran that's being recited. And I wanted those subtitles to sort of fit the flow of the recitation. So Sahih International was more useful than Abdul Halim, for example, because Abdul Halim's translation might change the word order to make it more suitable for English. So then you also have a phrase-by-phrase translation by Ali Quli Qara'i, who is a Shi'i translator. So there are some Shi'i aspects to the translation, but for the most part, you'd find it the same as other translations. But he's done it phrase by phrase. So those are some specific features you can find in particular translations. If you're looking for one with interesting footnotes, Yusuf Ali actually has interesting footnotes, but they're very particular to him, very personal to him. I think Muhammad Asad's footnotes are more learned, but yes, he's got a more rational bent. So some people might not like that. Some people do like that. So it's personal taste as well, which way you gravitate. A lot of people now are using the translation called the Clear Quran by Mustafa Khattab. It's another contribution. It furthers aspects of clarity for sure. That's why he's called it the Clear Quran. And he has also produced some versions of that which are aimed at children. He's got the Clear Quran for kids, where he's used a lot of things like types of illustration, activities, questions and reflection points, as well as, you know, simplifying the translation itself even further. So there's a lot of things out there. If you ask me about a particular translation, I could comment from what I know, but the thing is to pick up and read, and like I say, have a couple that you can sort of compare. If you were comparing Abdul Halim and Sahih International, you might get the best of those two worlds, which is clunky. The Sahih International is not fluent in English really at all. It's not fluent, but it is actually quite useful for picking up the patterns between the Arabic and English, and that's quite useful for Arabic learners actually. Ultimately, when the Khan Saeed translation, that's our one, comes out, you know, maybe then I'll say it's the best, you know, because everyone says that, right? Or they don't say it because they're humble. But naturally, every translation for me, as a person who's that interested in the topic, I find unsatisfactory. So it's only when I translate it myself that I'll be able to say, well, this is how I translate it. So in a very subjective way, it is the best. But objectively, no translation is ever going to be perfect. And I'm not sure any translation could ever objectively be described as the best. You know, it really depends. The best for what? That's the way I'd answer that question. There is a comment that I wanted to mention. It's not really a question, but just a remark about an American work. Let me just find it again. Called the American Quran. The American Quran, by the way, you know, its translation sounds, I mean, the title sounds very problematic, but all it is, as described here, it's this, Sandor Burke has used an Old English translation, and he's done drawings. So I'm going to read from the comment here from my brother Adnan. It took him some 9 years to finish, a form of tafsir or translation into images. His way of working was based on the question, how does the Quran speak to my contemporary American context? Which is quite inspiring. Sure, I mean, I've seen some of the images, and I get what you mean. It's something very different, very creative. Yeah, but is it English? Well, the word part is English, and the rest is something else. So are there further questions? Yeah.
Okay, sure. We have actually we have some questions in the comment section. Yeah, from Yasir Gotli. For a person who can read the Quran fluently but doesn't understand the meaning, what would you recommend for the person to read to start understand the meaning?
Any translation of the Quran in your language. That's it.
Okay. What about the Clear Quran translation?
This is the one I was just mentioning just now by Mustafa Khattab. So I don't have a rating system, but like I say, it's a good work. It's a valuable work.
And then the last one is from Samuel Sefiu about the translation or the tafsir of hijab and khumar.
So hijab in the Quran, it does not mean headscarf at all. That has become a way that we do talk about it in common speech, and that might vary from country to country as well. I don't know in Indonesia, but I gather from the comment that maybe you use the word hijab like that as headscarf. But in the Quranic usage, hijab does not mean headscarf. Hijab is any kind of barrier or screen, and the closest thing that comes to the topic of clothing and so on, and modesty, is if you ask the wives of the Prophet ﷺ for something, إِذَا سَأَلْتُمُهُنَّ مَتَاعًا فَاسْأَلُهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ, then ask them from behind a screen. So this is not about headscarf or whatever, but it does indicate, the aspect of modesty, not least with the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, the mothers of the believers. But then we have the ayat which instruct the believing women to draw their khumur upon their juyub. So in that is understood unanimously to refer to head coverings. This is khumur. The word khimar by itself could be any covering, but by convention it means head covering. So they were to draw their head covering over their chests. So it was assumed that they were already covering their head to some extent, but the emphasis on that was then amplified by the ayat which were revealed in that. So to translate khumur as headscarves, I don't see a problem with it. I don't know if there's a problem that you see in it, but it seems to be fine because that's what it is. We have the other question of, does the Quran hint towards covering the face? There's nothing in the wording of the Quran that says that, but it could be sort of understood as implied. It depends on what we understand by illa ma dhahara minha. So when they're told to cover their zina or their beauty, except what is readily apparent, what does that extend to? What does that apply to? Of course, most of the scholars, the majority, are of the view that the face and the hands are included in the exception. So what can be uncovered to those who are not close relatives. But then some include the face in that which should be covered. Am I familiar? Okay, when can we expect the Khan Sa'i translation to be published? Wallahi, I don't know. We're working on it very slowly, but what I would expect is we can release parts of it before the whole thing is complete. So, for example, with Surah Yusuf, we can release that translation with that commentary before having to complete the whole Quran. I think that's fine. And what we're also doing, by the way, we discuss and negotiate every single word that we write down. Actually, sometimes we debate and we argue for, it could be half an hour over one word, it could be an hour over an ayah. We're discussing and debating with love, but the point is that at the end of it, one of us gives in and we both are satisfied with what we write down. But that process, we're even recording it because we have to do it over Zoom now, because we live far apart anyway. So this is all being recorded. So we're documenting our process, and our students are also writing down the thought process and the rationale behind everything that we're writing down. They're writing down the principles, the overarching principles that we bring up as we go through, so that we can also work out the basis on which we're doing what we're doing and try to be consistent to those principles. So it's a hugely interesting process, and we don't like to rush things. We really don't like to rush things, much as we love for you to get the results of it. But the process and the struggle is very rewarding in itself. So we might be selfish and take our time with it, as we have done with Surah Yusuf commentary. Are we familiar, you're asking, with the Maulana Wahiduddin Khan translation? Only a little bit. I have a copy of it here as well. It seems to be a nice translation. I don't really have any comments about it.
Okay, let's move to next question from attendance. Which one of you want to ask directly the Sheikh? You can voice, you can speak with Sheikh. Please, تفضل. Okay, may I ask you a question, Dr. Suhaib? Is intra-Quranic interpretation or intra-Quranic tafsir makes us feel that Quran doesn't need hadith anymore? Like some people say it, why if Quran is complete, is kamil, then why Quran needs hadith to be interpreted? Thank you very much.
I mean, so the question here about why would we need hadith to understand the Quran if the Quran is clear in itself? So intra-Quranic tafsir or tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran doesn't depend on the view that nothing else is needed to understand the Quran. Sometimes people want to overstate what it means when the Quran says that it is clear, right? So it's called Al-Kitab al-Mubin. It's ayat al-Bayyinat bilisan Arabiyyin mubin, in a clear Arabic tongue. Now, you might in theory say that means, okay, everyone can understand the Quran equally on every level. That's a nice idea, doctrine, whatever, but it just does not match with reality. Some people will understand the Quran extremely well, and some people will struggle to understand the Quran. And part of the reason will be the level of their language, right? But even amongst the Sahaba, there were people there were those Sahaba who were more able to appreciate and understand the meaning of the Quran. There were those who struggled perhaps with particular ayat. They had misunderstandings. One of the Sahaba understood famously, حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر, until the white thread and the black thread of dawn become apparent to you. That's when you should start your fast and you should stop eating, right? In Ramadan. So one of them, Adi bin Hatim, he used to place actual threads under his pillow, a black thread and a white thread, and he would hold them up to see when the time has come. And when the Prophet ﷺ learned about this, he gently and even humorously corrected him. He said, no, it means the blackness of night and the light of dawn, light of day. So the Prophet ﷺ came with the role of explaining and clarifying. He did so sometimes through his words. More so, he did so through his actions. The Sahaba would ask him when they had a question, and when they didn't have a question, then they would just understand from the Quran what they understood. So their understanding and their interpretation is extremely important to preserve it, to convey it. We find that, as we said, in the books like the Tafsir of Al-Tabari, where we have these narrations which are extremely valuable. None of that takes away from the fact that to understand the Quran, one of the things that we should definitely do, and Mufassirin should definitely do, and in fact do, is that they look at other ayat, both within the surah, before and after on the same page, or other parts of the Quran. One of the things that they will do is they will look where that word is used somewhere else, and that will help them to understand what it means here in this ayah that I'm studying. That will always be one of the things that we do. If the Prophet ﷺ had said something about it, that will be another thing that we pay attention to. If the Sahaba have said something about it, that's another thing that we'll pay attention to. If the Mufassirin have said something on the particular question that we're raising, that's another thing that we'll pay attention to. Not all of that is equally binding and authoritative, right? If something is a clear explanation within the Quran, of course it's authoritative. If something is a clear explanation from an authentic hadith, then that's authoritative. If it's a weak hadith, maybe not. If it is a hadith which is maybe not that relevant to the ayah, but partially relevant or questionable relevance, then some of the mufassirin might adopt it as an explanation, others might not. So there's a lot of subtlety. What we have in Ibn Taymiyyah's writings, which have been reproduced a lot of times, and I talk about this a lot in the thesis, but there's been this statement that the best form of tafsir is tafsir al-Qur'an through the Qur'an. And if you don't find the answer, then by the Sunnah. And if you don't find the answer, then by the companions. And the thing is that this whole 1, 2, 3 method is perhaps oversimplifying it to the extent that it makes it difficult to understand, because nobody says really that you find the answer in the Quran, then you don't even pay attention to the Sunnah. Even if there was an authentic, relevant hadith, you would ignore it because you already found the answer in the Quran. Nobody says that, actually, unless they are in that very strange category of people who are called Sunnah rejectors or hadith deniers or Quran only or Quranist or whatever they want to call themselves, who do not fall within the mainstream of Islam. So yes, understanding the Quran requires tools, requires intelligence, and it requires making use of those who have gone before us, not least that authoritative messenger who was sent with this message that we're trying to understand, and was sent with the explicit role of the clarifier, mubayyin, of its ayat. How could we possibly ignore what he said? So a couple of questions that are related to this. Let's see. How would you answer someone who says if the Quran is clear guidance, easy to understand, why do we require so much studying and reading? I would just point them to it's a fact. I mean, I'm not the one saying Quran is clear guidance and easy to understand. On some level, it is clear. On some level, it's easy to understand. But in many ways, it is not easy to understand. My whole field is tafsir. So my whole industry is around the Quran. Requires some effort to understand. Its clear teachings are clear, but many ayat require years of expertise in order to explain clearly. Okay, so why that's the case and what's the wisdom of that is a more extensive discussion. Question, in terms of even weak hadith, yes, even weak hadith can be used in tafsir, sure. I'm not saying only authentic hadith, I'm just saying that things are of different grades in terms of how binding is it to take this. Do I have to use every weak hadith? No. But a weak hadith can be used in tafsir, depending on what you're using it for. If it's not for deriving a ruling, then it may well be used for linguistic purposes or something else. Question here also, don't you think new knowledge can enhance tafsir? Sure it can. Yes, it can. New knowledge, science can enhance tafsir. As long as we don't go to sort of extremes in sort of forcing the Quran to fit new science and so on. But if it's just a case of benefiting from the most recent explanations of phenomena that the Quran talks about, and and to say, for example, it could be that the Quran is referring to this situation, and this, what we understand from science, helps us to understand what the ayah should or should not be understood to mean. For example, they were doing this many centuries ago. Imam al-Razi, when he comes to the ayat in Surah Al-Kahf, which talk about Dhul Qarnayn seeing the sun apparently set in a murky pool, fi aynin hami'a, he says, well, obviously, it does not mean that the sun actually set in that water. Why is it obviously? Because according to the science of his day, and of course our day as well, that would be absurd. So he doesn't just say, well, we take the Quran on its zahir, we take it literally, and that's that. No, he says, well, obviously, common sense and science, and he talks about the science to some extent in his own way, tells us that the Quran, that the sun does not set on the earth. So what does this mean? Then he goes into explaining how it means, passing over the horizon has, and if you are at the furthest extent at the sea, you would see it as if setting in that water. That's all that it means. So as we continue to get new understanding of science, that can inform what we say about the Quran, while recognizing that this is subject to development and change from era to era.
Okay, I think this is the last one about the Sheikh Alumgir Ali in the UK.
Yeah, I
What do
mean,
you think about this?
he's a friend of mine, but I haven't really looked at his work, or I'm not in a position to comment on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Shaib. Mashallah, mashallah, we have very interesting time here and many benefits, many fa'idah here. I have written from you, mashallah, about the pretext relation to the Quran Tafsir, and then the translation of Quran itself, translation of Tafsir books, and then the original works in English about Tafsir, and many things in multimedia, of course. Okay, but the time is limited here, and then we must stop this lecture. That's all for today. And finally, on behalf of Learn Quran, I thank Dr. Shaib Said very much for this special international lecture. And we will upload this recorded version of this lecture in our YouTube channel, and we will deliver also to your emails, including the email of the Dr. Shaib Said. And Dr. Shaib Said is very popular in social media, in Instagram and Twitter. I Tafsir Doctor as the founder of Kaski, and I think you must visit his account and follow him, and then also follow his lectures in internet. Thank you for your participation, all attendants here in this lecture. And Jesus and brother, I hope you enjoy our program now, and may Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala grant us with His mercies and His blessings. Subhanakallahumma hamdika, asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. See you again in next international lecture, and see you again, Dr. Shuhaib. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. Barakallah feekum.
Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for all. See you later.